Well, welcome to the Why Not You podcast. Today we have on the show with us today Robert Jordan, who's the co-founder and head of the leadership team at the Interim Execs. Is it Interim Executives or is it Interim Execs?
Well, the company name's Interim Execs, but it is referring to people who are interim or fractional executives.
All right. Yeah. All right. Good deal. Good deal. Well, we'll let you tell a little bit more about that in a minute. But he's also, Robert is a co-author of a book called Right Leader, Right Time. You can see that in the background there. And the subtitle is Discover Your Leadership Style for a Winning Career. So welcome, Robert, to the podcast today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
Thanks, Ghislaine. Great to be with you.
Well, good. Before we get going, I'd like to kind of warm it up a little bit and let the audience get to know you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and where you live now, and what it was like at the Jordan household.
I'm in a place about 100 times more boring geographically than Meridian, Ohio. Can we just start there?
Well, first of all, it's Idaho, not Ohio.
I'm sorry, Idaho. I saw that it was
Idaho. I get Idaho. I get Ohio. I get Iowa more than Idaho, but I don't know. I'm pretty remote.
Well, among all my travels, I've never been to Idaho. It's on the list. One of our best friends is from Moscow, and so grew up in the Chicago area. That's what you call flat and cornfields for about 500 miles.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We did have a long drive recently across the U.S., Chicago to California. New Mexico's got some interesting territory.
Yeah, Wyoming is the worst, I think. That is just, when it snows in Wyoming, it doesn't come down, it goes vertical. I mean, it ends up in Iowa or Ohio.
So grew up in the Chicago area. I'm your classic entrepreneur. Have been involved in many different businesses, but the thing that's stuck for the past many years is having a business called Interim Execs, and it's a global matchmaker. Organizations show up, they have some kind of leadership need, and as I'm sure we're going to talk about, the modern age, a lot of companies, they make use of what are called fractional or project or interim executives.
Well, it's an interesting concept. It's, I don't know how long it's been going on, but it's just recently maybe come a little bit vogue or whatever to have an interim exec, all different levels of executives and whatnot. So, but one of the things, Robert, that I like to talk about, or what I like to kind of bring up, is that there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of people that go to a weekend seminar and pay a few $1,000s and get a certificate. And then all of a sudden they're a self-proclaimed leadership expert. And I'm committed to not having people on here who haven't built anything. And I know that you have built something. I know that you have been in the trenches. You've done it. You've done it for a long time. In fact, I know that you've interviewed over 5,600 executives in your storied career, and you've worked for companies like Pepsi, Microsoft, and UPS, and many, many others. And so during those interviews, Robert, you discovered 4 distinct leadership styles, and that's really what I want to talk about today is those leadership styles. And you can tell us a little bit about that, how you got started. I mean, did you just get teed up with Microsoft, or did you have to kind of turn some stones to get there? So
the concept of these 4 leadership styles, I know we're going to talk about them. It was a disturbing discovery, though, that led us to writing the book, which is over the course of years and interviewing all these leaders, we had the feeling that the majority of leaders showing up were having careers and leadership experiences that were okay, but you wouldn't describe them as great. The flip side was that if you just looked at the top 2, 3, 4%, oh my gosh, these are incredible people, exceptional leaders. And there we spotted these 4 distinct leadership styles that you could attribute, at least some of their success to. So the pattern that was not winning if I was to sum it up, I would say a lot of leaders attempt to be all things to all people. That's a failing strategy. It's very easy to say. We all know that, but it's actually the way the majority of leaders go about their careers. And it doesn't work well. It's a bit of a kind of saving or a desperate strategy. Flip side, remarkable leaders, we saw these 4 patterns that we label fixer, artist, builder, and strategist.
Okay, so dig in a little bit deeper to the top of the top, the best of the best, and how you discovered what their secret sauce was.
So let's take each one and look at it a little bit. Fixer.
Okay, that's great.
Fixer is the energy. When we say leadership style, what we saw was that exceptional leaders have a process, an approach, a system, and our shorthand was calling that style. Fixer is the energy that you got to run into the burning building time after time. It's how you become wired at work. So an example in the world right now, as we're all talking, there's a company called FTX, a huge crypto exchange that went bankrupt. There may be 1 million creditors around the world, and hopefully not your listeners, but it's a huge explosion. And the court appointed a CEO named John Ray, who we would call a fixer. And it's no surprise that in his background prior to FTX, he was at Enron. Enron was a famous, huge disaster from the early 2000s. So a guy like John Ray, the CEO, he is wired to go run into the burning building time after time. Fixers need to do that. They need crisis through which to thrive.
Gotcha. Okay. So what about the leadership style that got them in the challenge? This FTX company.
Well, it's interesting. Of these 4 styles, we see different ways in which people kind of grow into their own form of leadership. Fixer energy comes around where, early in your career, you're smart, you're kind of undifferentiated, you're on a team, and somebody on that team or someone in leadership says, we got this problem, this other country, this other division, this other set of clients, and Glade's a really smart guy. Let's throw him in. No one else could solve this problem. Let's see what he could do. And you go into it, and it takes you 6 months, a year, 2 years, but you crush it. You just completely solve it, and you're hooked. And if that's the way you're wired, heaven help your company if they're going to go put you back in a steady state kind of maintenance mode, it's not going to work. One of the leaders we interviewed, he said, if I put a fixer into one of my companies and it's not broken, he'll break it just so he can fix it.
Gotcha. Okay.
We said that. We interviewed a lot of people for the book, and the fixers we knew, we said that. I was kind of trying to tweak them, and none of them took it as an insult. Their response was, yeah, so what?
Gotcha.
And they don't understand, that their wiring, it's very different from folks who are not wired as fixer.
So they knew who they were. They knew exactly what they were good at and what they thrived at. And they forgot about the other 3 categories that you're going to talk about.
Well, we would not try to pigeonhole any successful leader and say, you are just this one thing. Our observation is that for many successful leaders, there is a dominant style or a dominant style in a secondary. And that over the course of their careers, they tend to reinforce what we in the book, we say they're really great at doubling down. And that also helps them to be much better at collaboration with everyone else in the organization or on their team.
Okay. And so the second one was artist. Is that correct?
Yes. Artist views the world as a blank canvas or a piece of clay to be molded. So standout example in the world right now, Elon Musk, and I'm specifically referring to SpaceX, Tesla, the Boring Company. He's a phenomenal leader, and he leads absolutely through innovation. He's actually a cautionary example because as we're recording this, he still owns Twitter. I don't think that's going to be forever. Twitter is not his usual MO, and you can see all of the problems. And I hope he's ultimately successful. But you can see all of the problems that occurred that is the proof for every other fixer in the world. This is not a good playbook for you. Going in the way that he went into Twitter, yeah, it wouldn't work for the rest of us.
Yeah, creative versus fixing,
So
okay, get that.
artist energy is this is the person on your team who is the renegade. This is someone who is more rebellious. They don't necessarily fit in. They're not always agreeable, but they're capable of these discontinuous leaps, especially organizations that are stagnant. They need to bring artist energy in.
Okay. And then there's the strategist.
Yes. Well, let's first hit builder. We call this F.A.B.S for short, F.A.B.S.
Oh,
so builder.
Okay, so the acronym F.A.B.S. Got it. Okay. So, and I love how you're using the modern day examples, because we can all relate to that. So that's very good. Thank you.
So builder is the energy. And look, I know everyone in organization or business, we're all builders. Got it. We mean a specific definition here, which is the ability to take the nascent or the small product, service, team, set of client relationships, and take that to a point of market domination or scale. What you tend to see with builders, for example, if you see someone, they did a great job building a product and they get to an IPO, after the IPO, they tend to leave because they need that touch with something that is not yet at size. The mantra for the builder is market. It's about market domination. The mantra for fixer is velocity. You have to have speed to get to a solution. The mantra for artist is creation. For builder, you have market on the brain. Sometimes it's world domination. We'll pick on Elon Musk for a minute. I mean, what he's done with Tesla has changed thinking around the world in terms of how fast we're all going to be adopting electric vehicles, EVs. I think truly he caused something in the world that was not there before. Builder, that market domination can be huge like that. It doesn't have to be, You understand, Glade, being dominant in the real estate market, and that doesn't mean you have to serve everyone everywhere. It means you're great where you are in your market area.
Okay, perfect. Got it.
So strategist. Strategist is the leader of scale. Strategist is the leader of complex or vast organization. So one of the leaders we interviewed for the book had been the former Undersecretary of the Department of Defense, and she was in charge of the Navy. And when you have over 1 million people who are inside of an organization, it is a radically different exercise in terms of how you look at the practice of leadership. And her name's Janine Davidson, and she would talk about systems of systems, how you have influence. Strategist leaders talk about loyalty. They tend to be with one organization a long time. They talk a lot about being mentored and mentoring other people. A lot of emphasis on cross-training and cross-functionality. That language, you don't hear that from fixers, artists, and builders. Fixers, artists, and builders tend to be inside organizations. They're 5 people, 10, 50, 100. But generally, Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits, he had this phrase, personal span of control. And generally, those kind of leaders, there's a personal relationship that they are relying on to establish trust. The strategist does not have that available to them inside of organizations that are so vast in the thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of people that it is a completely different exercise in terms of how you lead effectively.
Well, that gives us a really good overview of those 4 categories and whatnot. Now I want to get a little bit personal on how you as a company and your team, how do you help people identify who they are, what their secret sauce is, and or companies? How do you work? Do you work on an individual basis, or do you work on more of a company basis?
Well, our goal is, be the best matchmaker in the world. And so organizations show up that have a particular need. And so we're assessing that to see if leadership is the right solution. The flip side is, because we've been approached by all of these thousands of executives, we developed ranking and scoring and screening. And at the high end, just looking at this top 1-2%, we developed a concept called RED team. RED stands for Rapid Executive Deployment. And so the business model is to be that matchmaker between an organization and either one person or a team going in to do something dramatic. We have a lot of internal culture and mantras because we've been at this a long time. And, one internal saying, we often demand heroics. We need heroes showing up, because in a lot of cases, organizations are in crisis. And if it's not outright crisis, it certainly is that they're troubled, or that they're upset that things are not as good as they could be.
I have to believe that it's difficult for someone coming in as a consultant, if you will, or a temporary executive, an interim executive, and there's egos involved. There's all sorts of time and maybe even familial positions and whatnot that are part of the problem, probably a lot of the problem. And for someone to come in and say, you're wrong and you should delegate this, that's got to be difficult.
It is. It's a great point you're bringing up. It is absolutely the art, the finesse of what it is to be a great executive, to be a great leader, able to do this work. And that is not easy to do that. I will tell you that, for example, fixers, they're always going into crisis. And people may have an impression of that, which means they come in and they're just ready to knock down walls. That's not what you tend to hear from leaders who are wired as fixers in terms of what their playbook is. The playbook you hear from these folks is, the first thing you do when you show up is you start listening. And it's not just listening to the people that brought you in, who are usually the owners or the board of directors. The secret sauce, for example, with Fixer is, you get down on the shop floor and
Right.
You're listening to the people who have been there and run the equipment, and the janitors and the administrative assistants who've been there forever and tend to be overlooked and discounted. Because in organizations that are not firing on all cylinders, there's a lot of, yeah, we tried that, it didn't work. And so the management team, and the higher you go, generally, the less they're actually listening to anyone inside the organization.
Exactly right. And if you and it is an art. It is an art to ask the right questions, and then just, God gave us one mouth and two ears for a reason. It's so difficult to just shut up and listen and really understand and perceive exactly what they're saying.
Yes.
So you must be really, really good at that.
Well, it's nice of you to say. I think I'm very well placed doing what I do, because I'm no longer in any gigs. I don't take on operational roles. And it was a discovery many years ago, because I started out as an interim CEO in the mid-90s, when this was unknown in the US.
Right.
This is a career calling, whether you call it interim or fractional leadership. The US is the last adopter. This started in Europe 50 years ago for very specific reasons that don't tend to apply over here. We're the last major country where this hits, but we will be the biggest consumer of it because the United States is the most vast economy.
Yes.
I had a lot of fun doing it. I was generally doing early stage technology because that had been my background. But what I noticed over time, as more and more executives showed up on our doorstep, was that phenomenal people were coming in far better than me, far more accomplished, and that I could do a lot more for the world if I would be a matchmaker as opposed to just doing these things on my own and hit or miss.
Gotcha. So what you do is you match up talent with need on the corporate side, and probably a lot of personality. There's a lot of matchmaking there too. I mean, certain personalities just don't work in
Right.
certain environments.
Chemistry is the ultimate test. We have
Okay.
a internal process called Match Matrix, and some of it is the obvious. What industry did somebody come from, and you have to pay attention to that for the company. But the ultimate thing is beyond our control, which is chemistry. The vast majority of the time, we get this right. We're fast, but we're very careful doing this. We have another mantra internally, which is perfect or not at all. We're not a public company. We're not answering to outside shareholders where we got to have increasing earnings every quarter. We want to do this work with perfection or not. Even with that standard, sometimes it doesn't go right in chemistry. And because we're in such a human business, that's when we're always offering to say, let's stop today. This is not like you drove the car off the lot. It's your car. Good luck. Take it into service if it doesn't. That's not the way that this works. Our default is, are you at all not completely happy? Let's think about just stopping this if it's not a good fit.
Yeah, well, that's so critical. I mean, I'm a big Jim Collins fan, and Good to Great, and all those case studies that he did on those different companies. It always came down to having the right people on the bus, but more importantly, having the right people in the right seat on the bus, and that seems to be what you excel at in with your company.
Yes, yeah. The world has become even more situational. Is the way that we would put it. The book, the book we're talking about, Right Leader, Right Time, you couldn't write it 30 years ago. That would have been impossible. The world was much more geared towards lifetime employment. Your parents, your grandparents' generation, if you got a job at General Motors, boy, you were going to hold on there for dear life for your whole career. That's not the way the world is wired anymore. It's just not
so true. So true.
Now, we're all familiar with LinkedIn. The founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, he had a standard kind of speech for new employees, which was, we understand you're here. It's kind of a tour of duty. And we want to make that a great experience for you and for us. But it was acknowledging up front, unlikely you're staying here your whole life. So
yeah, I did a lot of work in Japan, for about a 20-year period of time, and they were the ultimate, just go to school, get a good job, and stay there forever. And when someone was let go early for whatever reason, it was almost catastrophic because it was just so devastating. That was just like, I thought I was going to be here for life. But even there, in that culture, it's shifting. There's a major sea change that has gone on.
Well, that's interesting. So I have no experience with Japan, and researching and writing the book. We do have very much of a American-centric point of view here, because business is so vast and abundant in the U.S., that you have so much more opportunity for people in terms of how they express their careers. And my sense of a lot of other countries is it's not that open-ended. There's more sense of scarcity in terms of major employers, for example, and you don't have as much room for movement. Here, and even exacerbated by what we all just went through with COVID, because there's so much more remote work, there's more a sense a lot of people have of the freedom or the control they want over their own careers. We're having conversations now that they're even different from just a few years ago, pre-COVID. in terms of remote work and just how you're determining where your career is going to go.
So, do you help? I mean, okay, let's just say that there's some young, aspiring leaders, company CEOs. They want to climb the corporate ladder, that type of thing. How can you help them? How can your book help them to understand who they are, what's the right fit, and that type of thing?
It's a great question. And the first thing that I would say, if there's one message we would want to get out to the world, it is that exceptional leaders tend to reject more of what is not for their highest and best use. Highest and best use is something we talk a lot about in the book. And that is something that you discover in your career, your journey, and it's going to be over time. That's not generally for most people something that is instantaneous. Now, saying that you should reject what is not for your highest and best use, it's easy to say, incredibly hard when you are young. You need the job, you need the money. Rejecting something, are you kidding? But what you tend to see among successful people over time, over a span of a career, is that it becomes more and more intentional. And these decisions, decision is from the Latin for to kill off. And so these decisions about what you will go for, that you will go this way and not that way, they keep on reinforcing. And for successful people, your confidence keeps building as it becomes more intentional, and that it keeps reinforcing the things at which you're becoming great and acknowledged for, and that you're loving, and that you're getting off of your plate those things you're not great at it, you don't love it. And as your confidence grows, your ability to collaborate with other people on a team grows. Because ultimately, that's what's going to determine success at any business that has two or more people is, Glade, if I can play to your strength, let you run with the ball, the things you're great at, that's going to be awesome. And when it is to my strength, you give me the ball. If we can acknowledge that, then, it gets to, your question is, what is the advice for someone younger? It is that by listening, for example, to your podcast, you're going through some self-discovery, which is good. What do you do with that? Have a conversation with your team or one person on your team, which is say, I think I'm wired. I feel like because I keep coming up with these ideas and I can't stop, I think I have this artist wiring in me, right? And that it could seem somebody else, they're always gravitating to the problem. They love solving problems. Is to acknowledge the differences in our wiring is going to make us a stronger team. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I couldn't agree more that it is self-discovery. It is about intention, and it's also about taking action. And there's no way that you're not, and you're going to make some decisions sometimes that it doesn't turn out right. It is like, hey, wait a minute. I thought this was, I had a good feeling and the vibe was good. And well, you know what? Just learn from that. Learn from that. And then, if you learn something, you don't lose. It wasn't a waste of time, but just keep honing those skills, honing that self direction, and just know that you're going to skin up your knees a few times. I mean, that's the only way we learn.
Skin them every day.
Every day. Yep. Well, that's really good. Well, it also made me think a little bit about Jim Collins, where he talks about, good is the enemy of great. I see so many people who just take a good job. Life is good. Things are good for now. And they just don't challenge themselves, and they just stay places too long without challenging themselves, without getting uncomfortable and growing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, gosh, time flies when you're having fun, and it's been great talking to you, Robert, and I appreciate your wisdom and experience. And I'll put in the show notes how do people get a hold of you, how they buy your book. Is there any other ways to follow you, or blogs or anything like that that they can glean a little bit of wisdom and from you?
Oh, thank you. Easiest to reach me at interimexecs.com. And I'd encourage your listeners, Glade, if they're at all curious about their own leadership style, to take the assessment, the F.A.B.S, F.A.B.S, F.A.B.S leadership
Oh, you have
assessment.
you actually have a leadership assessment form.
Yeah, it's about a 3-minute assessment. It's at rightleader.com, and you'll get an instant result. And I'll tell everybody up front, you get a result after 3 minutes, which is about how long it takes to take it. And then there's a final question, which is, did we get it right? And so, we're hearing from people. It looks like so far the assessment is proving to be to produce valid results for people. But we hope that's a little form of self-discovery for everyone.
Awesome. I'll definitely put that in the show notes and whatnot. And then after they see the results, then what?
Well, that's where having a conversation with your team comes into play.
All right.
We hope you take that result. What I've heard from people is, in some cases, an incredible sense of validation that, we're all quirky. We're all wired our own quirky way, and that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to be. And to get a little validation that your track is a good track is a good thing to know. And there's a lot of characteristics for each of us around our own particular style, which is good to honor and to reinforce.
Well, and I really like what you said about highest and best use. I mean, obviously in real estate, that's something we look at property all the time, or a building and whatnot. And, what's the highest and best use of this particular piece of property or real estate or home or whatever. And but I don't know that I've ever really had anybody humanize that a little bit and say, what's my highest and best use? I like how you did that.
I'll give you an example, which is, if you're wired that you have to have multiple projects going on at the same time, we believe that is a form of artist energy. And, you could feel like, why am I so distracted? I have to work on these multiple things. Well, that is part of what tends to be the more creative process, as opposed to, for example, people who are wired as fixer, they tend to work on one blow up at a time, one crisis. If it's a company, the guy that went into FTX, I guarantee you he's not doing this on the side with another company.
Yeah.
It's all consuming.
Right.
But, so for example, artist leaders we interviewed, we would say, do you need multiple projects simultaneously? And they're all like, yes. And that's how I'm wired. I'm wired artist. I have to work on multiple things at once. I cannot. It would drive me crazy if somebody said, just stop everything else. So yeah, I hope there's some forms of validation for people.
Well, I mean, I'm listening and I'm taking notes, and I'm going to take that assessment. I've taken every assessment there is that I thought was known to mankind, and they all kind of have me figured out pretty good. But I mean, my challenge in life is I see opportunity around every corner. I mean, I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole all the time. Oh, there's a good. Oh yeah, bam. Yeah. I got to go do that. And I hear that I'm supposed to be a fixer. Focus on one thing, and every time I focus on one thing, I'm challenged by that.
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm always, looking over there, looking here, looking there. And it's like, what do I do with all these opportunities?
Well, but the example for you, I mean, we're just getting to know each other, but you have to have some artist energy in you because you're doing this podcast. So you're a guy in business who is doing this. Automatically, we know something about you, which is you're up on creativity and innovation, among other things.
Well, maybe you can straighten me out and get me going in the right
direction. You're already straightened out, but you just need to keep on. But the key with artist energy is you have to produce.
Yeah.
See, everybody has lots of ideas. The key with artist as leader is you have to enlist and enroll. And so those winning innovations, they have to reach the market and they got to get paid for. And that is the test. That would be the flip side of that coin.
Yep. And then once it's up and going, in my mind, I mean, and I've kind of, done things, then the day-to-day, the 7 to 10% growth,
No,
not interested.
Yeah. Same here.
Got to go find something else.
Yeah. I got to move on. Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. And I always ask the people. I always ask what's your one piece of advice, but you've already given that to us. So I'll make sure that I put the assessment on there, and how to get your book, and anything else that might be of benefit to our listeners today. So thank you, Robert, and all the best to you, and Godspeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Clay. It's been a pleasure to be on with you.
All the best.